Hiya! So it is time for the March reading wrap up. I fear, based off what I said in my March TBR, this video may disappoint, but hopefully it doesn't. Because firstly, I have an audiobook called How to Be Anti-Racist. I'm sure people have heard of it before. I know it was going around a lot in 2020. It is something I highly recommend. Let me get into what it's about first. Yes, it discusses systemic racism, but also the individual races and how people have a lot of unchecked biases and you need to do more work than that. A lot of these unchecked biases are very subconscious because of the way things are taught to us, the way history is presented to us in school. This is very American as well. The author is American, and he also went to university in Florida, so I get it. And it is important as the individual to be anti-racist, to check your biases, because while systemic racism and racist policy is a huge issue, it is hard to fight against those if you are not, as the individual, making sure to be anti-racist. It does talk a lot about semantics in the book as well. I would also say it kind of at times comes across as the author's biography, but because the author is talking about his story as a Black man in America, it makes sense. It talks a lot about bigotry running deep in our culture and our language, and how that's also like goes with those unchecked biases, and how it's not enough to be non-racist. You have to work harder to be actively anti-racist. Because again, with the semantics, being not racist is too neutral of a term. It's almost like being apolitical, like, well, I'm not doing anything harmful, but a lot of times inaction is an action in itself, in the sense that you're choosing to do nothing. And yes, I understand at times, especially in the current political climate and social climate, it feels very hopeless. Like, what can we really do with these systemic issues? And I read this very much at the beginning of the month. It was actually, I started it at the end of February, but anyway. So I don't remember if this is like a take in the book or just my take, but I do want to say that you kind of have to focus on the little things that you can do and can control in these times of hopelessness. Take those little things that you can control, like your own unchecked biases, and work on that, and then we can take that further by doing protests and petitions and how you vote and all that kind of stuff. It is really hard. Like, it is a systemic issue, and the whole voting system and all that kind of stuff, because this also goes into voting and the way something I thought was very interesting when he talks about being at a Florida university during the Bush-Gore incident, which is something that I learned about quite often. I was talked about quite often in Florida schools growing up. I obviously wasn't old enough to vote at the time. I was probably barely old enough to read. I don't know if I even could read at that time in my life. I don't remember what year that was, because I don't remember that year. Was I even alive, actually? I just know I've heard about it and know about it, but something that was very pushes those numbers that I think is still talked about and pushed and like put out there is that Black people are not getting out and voting. And I think that's something that's still talked about, like with Trump, like, oh, why aren't you voting against Trump? Like that kind of stuff, when he obviously does not care about people of color and minorities, all minorities, anyone but cis, straight, white, rich men. But what is not shown is the amount of Black people who are turned away from polls, which does not surprise me that is kind of the truth of the matter, is that a lot of policy is put in place, and a lot of there's gerrymandering, there's all this different kind of stuff that kind of stops Black people from being able to vote against these racist politicians and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I remember my first time voting in Florida, they gave me a hard time about my signature and how it didn't look exactly like it did on my license that I had gotten like 4 years prior. So I had to do it like 4 times. They also told me I looked like I was 15, so I think they didn't trust that I was old enough to vote. I also, you can see that what you're registered as, it's public in Florida, so they knew I wasn't voting for Trump, and it was a very red area. So very unfortunate, but that's being said, it's like that kind of stuff. I'm not surprised, like, hearing that. I was like, yeah, I guess I didn't think about, like, even I had trouble voting. And of course, these are a lot of racist people in power in these positions that are able to turn away Black people from the polls and like make it harder for Black people to vote and then deflect the blame. But yeah, it also talks about, of course, racial injustice in the legal system, which is a huge thing, and also talks about colorism, which I think goes even deeper than some like surface level educational tools on racism and all that kind of stuff. So I do think it's a very important read. I think especially if you are white, if you are someone who's not going to experience racism or anything like that, I would definitely recommend, because I remember people talking about this book, taking things out of context and saying that everyone is racist, and if you're not anti-racist, you're racist. It's what I said before. Being neutral in something is still taking a stance. If you're not actively like condemning and like fighting against these racist policies or like just any kind of like prejudice, harmful policies, then you are being complicit. So it is just kind of about take the time to learn about these injustices and these racist policies, and like even like if it doesn't affect you, especially if it doesn't affect you because you have that privilege. But yeah, I think if you want to be an ally, if you want to be anti-racist, which I think we kind of all should, then I would definitely recommend this. Like I said, especially definitely in the political current climate, to kind of, I think like with a lot of people feeling so hopeless, to kind of ignite that like if we can do individual work, or we at least as a community can be better to each other, I think it can ignite some more hope that we need. The next one is one that I did say I was going to read, The Tuesday Club Murders, that I keep accidentally calling The Tuesday Murder Club. But it is a book of short stories by Agatha Christie. So it is short stories that all kind of center around Miss Marple. So in Agatha's foreword, it does say that she is kind of inspired by Agatha's grandma. I'm saying Agatha like I know her, you know Agatha. But Miss Marple, in the first bit of short story, she is part of a club of people that call themselves the Tuesday Club Murders, because they get together on Tuesdays and they discuss mysteries that they then try to solve, figure out what the solution is. Whoever brought up the mystery knows the solution, of course, but that is where the name comes from. Those are not all the short stories. They're just the first handful, and then the rest they're all about Miss Marple though. And some of them, like for a few chapters, it may be in the same setting, but with different mysteries each chapter. So it's very interesting in that way, but I did really, really enjoy this. I mean, disclaimer, it is a product of its time. So there is prejudiced language, problematic language, and of course, I say this all the time, I don't think you're a problematic person if you read problematic books. I just wanted to make that disclaimer because of like that can be triggering, but yeah, reading books with problematic themes, languages, all that kind of stuff doesn't make you problematic. And me personally, I care more about condemning current authors who are using problematic languages or spewing problematic views and profiting off of that, of course. It's a lot different when it's a book from the 1920s using prejudiced language. If you are using prejudiced language, if you're being ignorant and like using that kind of language of books now in 2026, that's a different story. But like I said, I did love this. I figured out some of the reveals before they were said, and I do think I'm a mystery girly at my core, actually, because I love the Benoit Blanc films. I love, and I've said this before, I love subtext and foreshadowing and all that kind of stuff, because I love putting together the clues and figuring stuff out. So I do think after fantasy, my second favorite genre is mystery. I mean, I need to read some more mystery, but it makes a lot of sense. And I would love more fantasy with like a mystery subplot. Next is an audiobook that I didn't finish before it went back to the library. It's called The Gendered Brain. From what I got from it, from what I heard before it expired, was it's about dismantling gender essentialism and kind of dissecting scientific research that kind of pushes this idea of a gendered brain and all that kind of stuff, and like examining the biases within the research and possible fallacy within the research, which was very interesting because I am someone who does not believe in gender essentialism. So I was very intrigued by that. It's very, very scientific. And like I said, I didn't finish it, so I can't say a whole lot, but possibly something I'll pick up again in the future. I just don't really like keeping things or like renewing a book from the library because I feel bad because someone else is usually waiting for it. Finally, yes, this is the final one, and I will get into why in a second. Girl dinner, which I hate that term. I hate that term, as I was just talking about anti-gender essentialism, but this book was actually pretty interesting. Let me get into it. So this story centers around this prestigious sorority that's at an unnamed university, and it follows two protagonists that become involved with sorority in some way. First, there's Sloane. She's an adjunct professor at this university. She was given this job mostly because her husband is a tenured professor at the same university. Did I say at the sorority or the university? She is going back to work as this adjunct professor after being a stay-at-home mom with her daughter Isla for a year and a half. So she has to deal with all the like implications and everything that comes with kind of having this job because of her husband, as well as being away from her daughter for the first time since she was born. So while bringing Isla to daycare, she runs into Alex, who is an alum of the university, and she of course was in that sorority and is still a mentor for that sorority. So she ends up recruiting Sloane to be like the professor supervisor. I don't remember the term for it, but that is how Sloane gets involved with this sorority. Then there's Nina, our other protagonist. She is a sophomore at the university, and she is dead set on becoming a part of the sorority, on rushing the sorority. So why is the sorority such a big focus? Because all the women in it are highly successful, flawlessly beautiful. The alumni are working full-time in like these really high-paying, highly acclaimed jobs, and they are also mothers, and they're somehow balancing it all flawlessly. They've seemingly achieved this impossible and quite frankly backwards idea of being a perfect woman. So you have Nina's point of view from the inside, what is kind of the pull of the sorority for her, and then you have Sloane's point of view from the outside of trying to figure out why it is that the sorority is so perfect. What is their secret? How are they all doing these things that she is struggling with? So that whole what is the secret is kind of where that thriller, horror, and even kind of mystery aspect comes in. New framing. The guys next door are singing. It was very on the nose with his messaging, but I would say it's very much like a feminist think piece at times, so it kind of made sense for it to be on its nose, which it's with its messages of feminism and the complexities of womanhood and motherhood, and how my personal take is you cannot define those things. As I was saying, motherhood, womanhood, complexities, I don't think that there's one definition for those things and all that kind of stuff. Being a woman and being a mother is simply just being a woman and being a mother in whatever way that looks to you. I also wouldn't say it was surface level. It definitely went deeper than other things. Like, for example, I would say the Barbie movie is very surface level feminism, but I do think it still could have probably gone a bit deeper, especially going after like dismantling gender essentialism when it comes to like the complexities of womanhood. And I do think in a way kind of examining the complexities of womanhood. It does that to a degree, but just me being the person I am, I was like, you could always go deeper. But of course, this wasn't a book on feminist theory. It was a fiction book, so I still like, I'm not mad about it. It's just my general take on feminism and the way I think inherently gender essentialism and dismantling gender essentialism is a part of feminism and intersectional feminism, especially, which to me personally, feminism is just intersectional feminism. It's not feminism if it's not intersectional. So anyway, I do understand why it gets criticism. I do understand how things can be misconstrued. I also understand that it is quite slow. It does take a while to get to that thriller horror aspect, which to me kind of built up the suspense more, but I'll get more into that later. There were also definitely some questionable things discussed in chapter 27 that I was like, this is fiction, and I don't think it necessarily has to be like overtly didactic and condemn bad things, but I was like, why are we even discussing this? It did sometimes seem to be trying too hard to be psychosexual in some way, in the way it kind of compared a lot of things to sex and eroticism and just tried really hard to make it sexual and erotic and that kind of stuff, which is being a human story, like I get that. Not to compare it to Challengers, but like what I love about Challengers is the way the psychosexuality is very subtextual, therefore making the viewer have to pick up on the nuances of like, oh, this tennis match is actually about their relationship and attraction to each other. Like this one just compares so many things to sex and eroticism and like has quite a bit of focus on sex, which like fine, like I said, it is a story about these humans' lives and that kind of stuff, but I also think there's so much more to humanity and lives than sex, so that's just my personal take on it. Criticisms aside, I did really enjoy reading this book. The imperfections that I noticed did not tarnish my reading experience. I honestly really got into this book, and like I said, I do think it's kind of due to the pacing because of how slow it was. I was like, okay, I saw the genre tags on Storygraph. How are we gonna get to the thriller horror part of this? Also, how are these characters' lives going to kind of intertwine? What really is it about this sorority? I mean, there was always kind of like that mystery aspect of like, yes, what is it about this sorority? But yeah, the aforementioned slowness, it really made me want to keep going and really get to those horror thriller elements. But like I said, it does take a while to get there. So I think with the marketing of it, it is like kind of expected. I did expect more from those horror thriller. It felt very tame, even though it is like a freaky concept. I kind of expected more in that sense, but I still, like, when I say I really enjoyed this book, I mean, like, there was one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like mad at myself that I had been sleeping and not reading, even though I am a human who needs sleep. Like, I really need sleep. But back to, I also understand why people didn't like the ending. I read some reviews that people were not satisfied with the ending. They were not happy with the ending. I think you're supposed to be mad with the ending was my takeaway from it, because obviously I was like enraged. I only kind of figured out exactly what was happening 2 pages before the reveal. So the gasp, because I finished this book at like 11 o'clock at night when I finished it. So if I woke up people with my gasp, so sorry. With that being said, I do understand that in a way the ending kind of undermines the like feminist views throughout the book, but I do think that's kind of what you are supposed to, what it is supposed to do, and you are supposed to take from it, that like Sloane ends up doing the very unfeminist and problematic thing because she was so obsessed for striving to be this perfect woman, something that doesn't exist. And I think the point is for you to think more about that and all that kind of stuff. And I do understand if people wanted more like of a hopeful ending, especially I was talking about hope earlier and how helpful it is in a time like this. But that ending really stuck with me. I really thought about it for a while. Also, there is the whole eugenics aspect of it that is very much brushed over. There isn't really a part, like I said, it doesn't have to be didactic. It doesn't have to say eugenics is bad, but it's never once like someone going, hey, this is eugenics when you look at it through the disability lens. But so do I think the writing is completely flawless? No, but it did still keep me interested and pull me in. And I do want to read Gifted and Talented and Alone with You in the Ether and some other books of her, because I have seen I have seen fans of hers saying that this is not, of Olivia Blake, saying this is not her best book. But I still found it to be enjoyable, so if the other ones are better. I mean, there was one night too where I was reading it in bed and I was reading it on my, like, it was an e-reader. I got this from the library. And so was I reading it in the dark with the screen on, which is probably bad for my eyes, which already, I don't have great eyesight, but like, we don't need to talk about that. I was, and so like, anyway, so the light is shining and I see this movement out of the corner of my eye and I look over and there's a giant spider looking over my shoulder trying to read the book. So clearly it's an interesting book. Now, that is the last book I have a review for this month. I know there's only 4, but the thing is, and like I mentioned a lot more than that in my what I wanted to read, but I got busy, and like part of it is I'm working on some cool videos. But there's also Happy Place. Is that the one I'm reading by Emily Henry, that I was like, I needed to finish that because I did start it in February. The issue is we're not in February anymore, so it's not Valentine's month anymore, so love is not a focus, to say the least. Romance, at least, books. So I've had a hard time picking that back up and getting back into it, but I have to in April because I can't do this being in the middle of a book anymore for months. I didn't do that. Actually, I did that in 2020, but I very rarely have done that in my life. It was the second, it's a duology. It's the second and last book, and I have reviewed it on my channel, The Letters of Enchantment, the second one, Ruthless Vows. I was like in the middle of that for probably 6 months, and I'm not doing that again. I'm simply not. I'm either DNFing books or I'm finishing them. Yeah, real problems. No, I'm just happy to be here, guys. And so yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you like this, like and subscribe. I have some fun video coming next week and some more after that. And yeah, see you soon. Bye. Ow, I'm sitting on my feet and it really hurts.